Ross is a cultural icon who continues to resonate and is being rediscovered through online streaming, the sensory tingling of ASMR, and new exhibits. So I thought it would be fun to just go through this magazine together and see what it has to say. And while I'm doing that, I've also got a cup of pumpkin chai tea from David's Tea that I will be sipping occasionally. It is just really, really good. Contents. We've got a foreword about why we love Bob Ross. 4 parts. Part 1. The man. Bob Ross zealously guarded details of his private life both before and after he became a pioneer of painting, with the most famous perm on public television. So it goes through the early years. Bob Ross's family, the joy of painting, and Bill Alexander, which, if you know anything about Bob Ross, is a fairly common name to be mentioned. And I'm sure this will go into why, of course. So then we have part 2, the painting studio. Today, there are thousands of graduates of the Bob Ross teacher training program across the world, but millions are seeking out the joy of painting videos with no intention of learning how to paint. So it goes into happy little accidents. Famous phrase uttered by Bob Ross all the time. I love it. And then becoming a certified Ross instructor. Step by step with Bob Ross. The inspiring landscapes. Godfather of ASMR. Then we have part 3, the legacy. When Ross passed at the age of 52, he could never have predicted how many people would mourn his passing or plan to visit his art in museums, which includes belongs in a museum, one-stop shop, celebrating his life. Then part 4 is the gallery. Instead of naming his paintings after real-life locale, Bob Ross would focus on an idea: tranquil, wooded stream, or golden glow of morning that evoked an emotional response in the viewer. Bob was committed to keeping painting accessible, to getting great effect without using any fancy tools. So then we go into the foreword. A nice black and white photo, kind of behind the scenes, sort of. Why We Love Bob Ross by Jim Needham. In 1981, a tall, lanky patriot finished his service in the Air Force and began to paint himself into the American story. Bob Ross showed up unannounced at our station one day in the winter of 1983 to pitch an idea for a painting show. As the general manager of WIPB-TV in Muncie, Indiana, I had the privilege of meeting him and his business partner, Annette Kowalski, when they visited. about how they conceived the show, how they went through the show. So then we go into the early years of Bob Ross. And on the photo here, of young Bob Ross, it says, "Back in the days when we used to listen to shows on the radio, before TV was popular enough for my neighborhood to have one, I used to listen to some of the shows and they'd all be sad at the end, and I threatened my brother if he told anybody at school that I got sloppy-eyed over some of these things." So it says The Early Years by Gina McIntyre. Bob Ross was a medical records technician in the U.S. Air Force before he took up his first painting lesson at an Anchorage, Alaska USO club. With his soothing, soft-spoken manner and his immediately recognizable mount of curls, Bob Ross wasn't the sort of flashy art world star likely to generate headlines. He wouldn't have been a show at a trendy New York gallery or be anointed by critics as painting's next big thing. Yet, for millions of viewers, Bob Ross, through his long-running public television series The Joy of Painting, fostered a critical appreciation of both the process of creating a work of art and the art itself. Ross made art accessible to the masses. He began each program with a blank canvas and concluded it with a completed painting. No matter what your level of experience, if you followed along with Bob, you too could create a pleasing landscape to hang in your home. On screen, Ross was a painter and a teacher. Behind the scenes, Ross was a savvy businessman who, with the help of his wife and friends, worked his way up from humble circumstances to become a much-beloved figure whose celebrity knew no borders. To many of his faithful viewers, Ross also came to feel like a friend, a reassuring, serene presence, always happy to share his talents with the world. He wasn't only a painter, says talk show host and superfan Phil Donahue, who once called Ross the most famous painter in the universe. He was an entertainer in his own right. Donahue went on to say, without any flash, his painting spoke for him. He took you by the hand and led you along the way. Off-screen, Ross was an intensely private man who zealously guarded details about his personal life. He granted very few interviews. Much of what is known about Ross can be surmised from occasional remarks he would make when he was adding happy little trees to his paintings. Occasionally, he would allude to his loved ones, or to significant events in his past, dreamy afternoons with his half-brother, his abiding love for his mother, a childhood fascination with nature. In the wake of Ross's death on July 4th, 1995, at the age of 52 from lymphoma, those closest to him have continued to be respectful of the artist's privacy. And so, with that, I'm going to also be a bit more respectful of his privacy. And we'll just skip to The Joy of Painting. It began with a simple greeting. Hi, I'm Bob Ross, and for the next 13 weeks, I'll be your host as we experience the joy of painting. That kindly welcome opened the first episode of Ross's landmark how-to series, which was designed to teach viewers that anyone, regardless of their background, could create original works of art. Ross's easygoing charm, his utter lack of pretense, and the intimacy he created with the viewer all marked the series as something special, a lo-fi educational public television program with the potential for real lasting appeal. The fact that interest in the joy of painting and in its down-to-earth star has only increased over the last few decades would no doubt surprise the humble Ross, a man from a modest background who simply wanted to share his passion for oil painting with the world. During his life, he worked tirelessly, preaching the merits of artistic pursuits, a message that has now spread to a whole new generation of fans thanks to the series' widespread availability on streaming services and YouTube. It says, at the beginning of the show, Ross would start with a blank canvas and finish less than 30 minutes later with a completed oil painting. He said, Annette, these television programs could go on for years. Little did he know. I want to be sure and wear something on television that looks as good 30 years from now as it does now. From the earliest days, Ross wanted to create a homey, comfortable space for viewers. Initially, he envisioned a log cabin-style setting, though Ross ultimately opted instead to place his easel in front of a simple black curtain backdrop. Bob's original idea was to have this elaborate set, Walt Kowalski says. It looked like a trapper's log cabin, but it finally dawned on Bob that he would not create the intimacy with the viewer with all of that in the background. Ross took great pains to prepare before filming an episode. He'd begin by producing one finished version of the landscape that he'd be painting on camera. Although the audience never saw that original reference painting, Ross would occasionally look to it as he was recreating the image on screen. Bob insisted that nobody ever see the finished painting, because sometimes he didn't have time to do everything that was in that painting, and he would have to leave out a big tree or a bush or a boat, Annette Kowalski says. With the joy of painting underway, Ross had an idea for a series of illustrated instructional manuals that could serve as a companion to the series, offering step-by-step directions to reproduce Ross's paintings at home. But WVNC didn't have the means to pay for a book, leaving Kowalski's to finance the project. It was going to cost $30,000, Annette Kowalski says. So Walt mortgaged our house, and we published Bob's first book. When we wrote the first book, neither of us knew one thing about writing a book or publishing a book, she continues. Bob, after he finished a painting in front of the cameras, we would go back home and he would repaint that painting. I would stand behind Bob with my Canon 35mm camera. He would make me take about 50 photographs the whole time he was painting. Those were the how-to photos he wanted in that book. Season 1 of The Joy of Painting aired on public television stations across the East Coast, but viewership was limited, and owing to the poor quality of the audio and video, those first 13 episodes were never aired again. The companion book, though, would plant the seeds for a thriving publishing business. Soon after, the WVNC partnership dissolved, leaving Ross to return to keep teaching full-time, and he and the Kowalskis in search of a new public television home, which soon led them to WIPB in Muncie, Indiana. I have a photo of Bob posing in front of Bob Ross Inc. offices and warehouse in Virginia. And then we have going national. With the filming of the second 13 episodes completed, Needham and his team, along with Ross, developed a plan to help the fledgling and by 1984, the joy of painting could be seen in most parts of the country. 30 stations had become 50. 50 had become 75. Eventually, the series would be carried on more than 300 stations in the U.S. alone. Every quarter, Ross would return to Muncie to tape a new season of The Joy of Painting. He even relocated to Indiana in 1987, renting an apartment near the television studio with a lake out back that was stocked with fish, which Ross, ever the lover of animals, would feed daily. He sometimes would even feature animal friends as guests on the show. Squirrels became his trademark. Bobbets appeared in several episodes in the 18th season. There was also Peapod, a squirrel that lived with Ross for about 2 years until the artist released the animal back into the wild. This was not something we were happy with or encouraged, but we allowed him to do it because Bob was Bob, Needham says. In 1989, with the arrival of his first hardcover title, The Best of the Joy of Painting, written with Annette Kowalski, Ross achieved still another level of success, making promotional appearances in such network talk shows as The Joan Rivers Show. Rivers introduced Ross as America's favorite art instructor, and when she asked Ross for the reasons for his popularity, he responded, "I think it's because magic really does happen in 30 minutes, and there's no editing to these shows. What happens really happens." By the early 1990s, nearly 300 episodes of The Joy of Painting were on the air in the US and Canada, but international interest began to grow, with the show appearing in such countries as Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Turkey, Iran, South Korea, and Japan. By now, Ross was arguably one of the biggest stars in the history of public television and the host of the most popular art show of all time. Yet behind the scenes, operations remained surprisingly modest. "It's very funny," said Joan Kowalski. "You think that Bob would pull up in some big limousine and he would jump out and the paparazzi would be clippering clip, 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 but in fact we were dragging easels. We were just a bunch of country folk in the big city." In this one, it says that Bob and business partner Annette Kowalski posed for a picture in Mexico in the late 1980s. Mexico was the first country outside of the United States to embrace Bob through product distribution, teacher training, and the joy of painting on television. Then we have Bill Alexander by Amy Wilkinson. Long before Bob Ross took the mantle of painting guru, there was his mentor, a German art teacher who instructed him. From 1974 to 1982, a German immigrant named Bill Alexander produced The Magic of Oil Painting on public television. When Ross debuted The Joy of Painting in 1983, it was seen as a passing of the torch from mentor and teacher to student. Born in 1915 in Berlin, Germany, where his family had fled from their East Prussia home to seek asylum during World War I, William Bill Alexander grew up in poverty. He took an early interest in art, however, perhaps inspired by an itinerant partner who would visit the local villages. Alexander first tried his hand at professional painting as an apprentice to a saddlemaker and carriage upholsterer, adding final flourishes, typically landscapes or flowers, to the buggies. Soon he too became an itinerant that he began developing what he called the Alexander method, a wet-on-wet painting technique drawing heavily from a more than 500-year-old style called alla prima that allowed him to finish a piece in just minutes. He began teaching the technique, and one day in the 70s took on a new student named Bob Ross. Ross had first gotten a taste of the joy of painting at USO Club in Alaska, where he was stationed as a master sergeant in the Air Force. When he retired from the military, Ross discovered Alexander's show. He decided to study under the painter and was hired as a traveling salesman and tutor for the Alexander Magic Art Supplies Company. Ross eventually struck out on his own and helped found Bob Ross Inc. and hosted his own TV show. Yet, Ross was quick to credit Alexander during his Joy of Painting debut, saying, "I learned this technique from a wonderful man that I think all of us had enjoyed for many, many years on TV, Bill Alexander. Bill taught me this many years ago, and it's just the most fantastic way to paint that you've ever seen." Despite the kind words, as Ross's popularity grew, the two became estranged. Alexander would go on to publish a series of books on his technique before dying in 1997 at the age of 81. And we have Happy Little Accidents by Nancy Lambert. More important than the paint, the tools, or the technique is Bob Ross's gentle, encouraging style of teaching and the joy of painting that endeared him to generations of amateur artists around the world. Decades later, his instructors are carrying on in both his method and his uplifting message. Everyone can paint. In the Joy of Painting's 31 seasons, one thing never changes: Bob Ross's unwavering belief that you can do this too. His warm, inviting vibe wasn't accidental, it was a choice. Traditionally, art has been for the select few, Ross told the Orlando Sentinel in a 1990 article about the soaring popularity of the Joy of Painting. "We show people that anybody can paint a picture that they're proud of. It's that message that everyone could do what he was doing that really made Bob Ross," said NPR journalist Kat Lonsdorf in a recent All Things Considered segment. "The world of Bob Ross," she added. "Bob Ross told you that as long as you tried, it would be right, no matter what." The Bob Ross method. Bob Ross's unshakable faith in his viewers' ability to paint is at the core of his method and his teaching style. The belief that art is for all is one he shared again and again on air. He instilled confidence into his fans and his students, which applied to their painting, but also extended beyond the easel. Bob's ability to captivate those watching into believing that anything is possible with a little practice encourages many people to pursue their dreams, even if it's not painting. Step by step with Bob Ross. In just 30 minutes on his television show, Bob Ross would take you through the easy steps needed to create your own creation. Just like this painting of under pastel skies, now you too can create a scene of serenity with these easy instructions. Ross's childhood in Florida and service to the U.S. Air Force in Alaska added color to all of his paintings. All those happy little trees and almighty mountains featured in Bob Ross's idyllic paintings weren't just figments of his imagination. The artist drew upon a wealth of stunning real-life inspiration. He says, "When I was learning, I would cover a whole canvas with nothing but mountains and scrape it off and do it again." The Alaskan landscape helped support Ross during his early years. To supplement his Air Force pay, he would paint scenes on novelty prospecting bands and sell them to tourists. When he left the service, Ross returned home to Florida, and his coastal roots are also evident in his work. See episodes like Ocean Sunset and Windy Waves, though they figure much less prominently. In fact, the blog 538 did a statistical analysis of subject matter on the 381 paintings Ross completed during his television series, and discovered that 91% had at least one tree and 39% had at least one mountain, while only 9% featured waves and 7% featured a beach. The mountains, he once told the Orlando Sentinel, were the most popular pictures. We get letters every day from people wanting more mountains. As many as I paint, they still say, "Give me more mountains." And we come to a section called Godfather of ASMR by Colleen Bordeaux. It turns out that Bob Ross's voice does more than give helpful instructions on painting. It also triggers an autonomous sensory meridian response in most people. Not sure about most people, but sure, a lot of people. Anyways, 2 decades after his death, Bob Ross became a YouTube sensation. The grainy 1980s episodes of The Joy of Painting record up view counts in the hundreds of millions and amassed nearly 4 million followers, many of whom had little or no interest in picking up a paintbrush. His viewers sought out Bob Ross because they enjoy listening to his slow, soft voice and the calming rasp of his painter's tools against the canvas. And they aren't alone. Bob's voice elicits a euphoric sensory experience that is today known as ASMR, or autonomous sensory meridian response, in millions of people. A sensation, a tingling that starts in the scalp, trickles down the spine, and eventually relaxes the whole body, is a buzzy term in health and wellness, but it's highly subjective and hard to document, which are reasons why the phenomenon has not attracted much attention in the scientific community despite the millions of people who claim to have experienced it, and who flock en masse to videos of people folding towels and scratching microphones. Bob Ross's voice is one point of consensus among the largely anecdotal and self-reported data. He's the classic example of an ASMR trigger, according to Craig Richard, a Shenandoah University physiology professor who has been researching the phenomenon. Ross's baritone voice just turned my brain to fuzz, says Richard, recalling his childhood viewing habits. I didn't watch it to learn to paint. It was a way to relax and fall asleep after school. Richard gave little thought to the relaxing effect Bob Ross's show had on him until the summer of 2013, when he listened to an episode of Stuff Mom Never Told You podcast. In it, they described how some people experienced pleasurable brain tingles while watching certain videos or hearing certain sounds. Jennifer Allen, a woman who had experienced the sensation while watching a video about the galaxy, spent years trying to quantify the effect. During her search, Allen found others online, forums who described the common phenomenon as a brain orgasm, but she felt more clinical language was warranted to legitimize the experience. So she made one up, telling the New York Times in 2019 that she selected autonomous because it referred to internal spontaneous feeling, sensory because it was sensation, Meridian to suggest pleasure, and give a nod to traditional Chinese medicine energy pathways, and response indicating that it happened as a reaction to external stimuli, like watching Bob Ross softly applying brush strokes to a canvas. There are countless videos and sounds that induce ASMR, but Bob Ross is regularly discussed when describing the phenomenon. He's considered the godfather of ASMR because he embodies the core principles of ASMR triggers: a gentle voice, soft movement, and helpfulness, says Richard. What's important to remember is that Bob Ross wasn't trying to relax anyone, he was trying to teach them to paint, said Richard. It's a great example of how Bob Ross's voice, tapping brush, and scraping knife are unintentional ASMR triggers. Researching how and why Bob Ross and others unintentionally evoked ASMR in viewers has allowed the phenomenon to be intentionally implemented in video and audio forms. Maria, a 33-year-old Russian who prefers not to give out her last name, was one of the earliest people to purposely create trigger videos to trigger ASMR. She started her YouTube channel Gentle Whispering in 2011 after using ASMR videos to help her with depression following a divorce in 2009. It's not just YouTube and Instagram influencers catching on. ASMR is also being used in creative marketing promotions to influence positive brand association. Richard has been working with companies such as JetBlue and Anheuser-Busch to help them understand what ASMR is and how to create triggers in advertisements. It's begun a shift in philosophy about how to reach consumers. When you think about how to create an advertisement that catches someone's attention, traditionally it's been about raising alert systems, says Richard. Yet, research shows that people like to feel relaxed, and they enjoy it when their brain calms down. Instead of trying to shout the loudest to capture attention, ASMR-inspired advertising aims to relax the viewer. Brands attempt to create the attention of the YouTube ASMR community by building content for the platform, and also by integrating ASMR triggers into more conventional forms of marketing. And it talks about the JetBlue Air SMR video, as well as the IKEA ASMR advertisement. BuzzFeed, Zippo, KFC, a whole bunch of different companies that have used ASMR in their marketing before. And then it says, experience it yourself. Not everyone can experience ASMR, says Richard, adding that there are also people who simply cannot find an ASMR trigger through video, but can in person. It's easy to test it yourself. You need to do it the same way you approach a buffet of food. Be patient and sample widely, says Richard. He recommends starting with YouTube videos or broadcasts focused on the more common triggers, including light touch and whispering. Being patient as you explore. After all, there are literally millions of options to choose from. One simple place to start exploring this phenomenon yourself is with the godfather of ASMR himself. Watch a few episodes of The Joy of Painting on Bob Ross's YouTube channel to see if he can turn your brain to fuzz, just like he's done for so many others. It says that there are more than 13 million videos on YouTube and more than 10 million posts on Instagram using the hashtag ASMR. Now, we'll get into the legacy. It says down here, Bob once predicted that his paintings would never hang in the Smithsonian. He was wrong. So, it says, my paintings will never hang in the Smithsonian, Bob Ross told a talk show host Phil Donahue in 1990. The critics in his heyday agreed, judging his art is for everyone philosophy and 30-minute landscapes as kitschy and unworthy of acclaim. As it turns out, Bob Ross and his critics were both wrong. In 2019, the Smithsonian acquired several of Bob Ross's paintings and other objects that they plan to place on display. First in a new acquisitions exhibit at the National Museum of American History, and eventually as a part of a larger long-term exhibit. The Smithsonian is not even the first museum to formally recognize the impact Bob Ross had on millions of Americans and people around the world. A slew of exhibits at museums began cropping up in 2019 to honor his legacy, acknowledging his enduring relevance and the growing resurgence of interest in his work. Now we have One-Stop Shop. Who knew you were able to replicate Bob Ross's iconic perm without going to the hairdresser or add Ross's smile to a piece of toast? An investigation into the wacky and fun merchandise available. In 2018, Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool 2 released a promotional teaser trailer featuring the titular character demonstrating a rather unique take on getting wet on wet technique. It wasn't the first time Bob Ross would be parodied in pop culture, but it may have been the most outlandish to date. Ross's publishing empire has a long tradition of producing wacky products from unusual food products, pictured an energy drink and a breakfast cereal, to garments with iconic paintings. As for more traditional merchandise, dozens of how-to books have been published, as well as titles for those more interested in immersing themselves in the philosophy of Bob Ross. Those interested in alternative or ironic ways of exploring Bob Ross can also pick up the Happy Little Accidents card game, or perhaps the Art of Chill board game, which combines Bob Ross quotes with creative exercises designed to be done with a group. Of course, you could also just receives within pop culture, from the faux Family Guy cameo to an epic rap battle to a Google Doodle feature, Ross's legacy and likeness lives on in a wide-ranging collection of licensed products. Through Bob Ross Inc.'s careful management of Ross's image, both literal and figurative, his image and his face and trademark halo of hair, even if he grew to loathe that perm, are just as recognizable today as they were 25 years ago, if not more so. In 2021, the seeds of Ross's legacy will take on more literal meaning in the southern Maryland, where Gold Petal Farms plans to honor Bob Ross by making him the subject of their annual sunflower maze in a twisting portrait spanning almost 6 acres. Owner Jerry Spence and his team will create a massive labyrinth in the shape of Bob Ross's head. Even though this is the first time Gold Petal Farms is featuring a person as its maze, Spence is confident he can pull it off. The image of Bob Ross is so well branded, Spence is noting, the hair will be a challenge. But who can honestly say that getting lost in Bob Ross's hair wouldn't be amazing? Nobody. Honestly, I love the fact that Bob knew how important his writing was, and even though he hated it, he kept the perm for the entire time, pretty much the entire time that the show was on. So, there we go, we have a gallery of Bob Ross's paintings. Here. And a wonderful quote again by Mr. Ross that says, "I try to get people to believe in themselves. I tell people, you can do this, and they write back and say, you were right, I can do this, and now I believe I can do anything. And that's where it starts. You have to believe in yourself." And that is why I love Bob Ross, not only for his amazing painting skills, but his positive attitude, his role as the godfather of ASMR, of course, but really believe that you can do anything if you just try, which is a wonderful message. So, although we didn't go through the entire book, I hope that you did enjoy this flip through of Bob Ross, the calm and wisdom of the beloved painter, because I